If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniac. December of last year, my friends and I stayed at this cabin up in the Rocky Mountains. It got ugly real fast. My friend's co-worker told him about this place and said that years and years ago, it was owned by some dude who lived in another state. I think it was another one of the Four Corner states, Utah or Arizona maybe. I guess the guy would rent out the cabin every so often for some extra income or something. The stories about this place were spooky, yeah. We're being stupid and reckless, but above all, curious. We decided it would be an awesome place to do some ghost hunting. The co-worker warned us against trying to open the locked door again, though saying that it was locked for a reason, and that it just is. We assumed he wouldn't open it, and we're just doing a Ouija board or EVP sesh or something. Now he seemed skeptical, but agreed to tell us where it was. There's all sorts of stories about this cabin, with the tales of the locked door being the most popular, of course. Other stories spoke of sightings of humanoids, unidentified lights in the sky and in the surrounding woods, ghost encounters, shadows, phantom smells, saying people had gone mysteriously missing in the area, strange sounds like sonic booms were said to rock the little valley the cabin was built in, and apparently a fire nearly burnt it to the ground more than a decade ago, but a heavy rain stopped the blaze, or so they say. Now personally, the stories what was in the guest book intrigued me the most. See, back when the cabin was being rented, which I guess was sometime in the 80s, there was this guest book that the owner left there, and like every other guest book, previous guests wrote random things in it. But what the guest who stayed at the cabin wrote was worrying, to say the least. It was some of the most interesting. Heard somebody stomping up and down the stairs at night. Think it was coming from behind the damn door. I couldn't open it. I think someone's down there. And another. Woke up to the smell of burnt food. Checked the fridge, and there's nothing there. Went on a hike for half the day. Came back, and the door that was supposed to be and stay locked was open. Ran outside to my car for a weapon, but when I got back, the door was closed and locked again. Didn't hear or see anything else for the rest of the time, but I couldn't get the door open again. So creepy, yeah, but enough to deter us from exploring? No. Now, they're just stories. And I was a group skeptic. Frankly, I was just going to the cabins for giggles, really. I wasn't going to let a little folklore scare me or my friends away. I figured the guy who owned the cabin was just creepy and probably lived in the basement, spying on his guests, maybe even kidnapping them, which honestly is a lot more freaky than anything paranormal if you ask me. Altogether, there's 4 of us: Casey, Lusa, Grace, and me. We left Border sometime around 10 AM. The cabin was near Rifle, in the Ruta National Forest, so it's a little more than a 3-hour drive in good weather. Luckily, it was unseasonably warm that day. The cabin was located far from any paved roads, so I parked at the closest trailhead. We got out, hiking our way towards it, using handwritten directions that Luca's co-worker given us, trying to make it there before the sunset. Near dusk, we all stumbled across a half-burnt, half-buried structure with a sunken roof. The front door was entirely missing. The forest had grown up and around it. We crept carefully through the doorframe, looking around with flashlights. It's obviously very creepy, run down, reclaimed by nature. It was half full of dirt and mud. This left us crouching down under what remained of the roof. Near one of the still standing walls was a sunken door. Only half of it showing. That's it. The door. It's Casey. He ambled forward and began pounding on it, yelling for whoever's inside to open up. We tell him to stop and he says, "Are we scared?" Casey walked back towards the front door, then disappeared around the corner. After a moment, he yelled, "There's nothing back here. Wall is totally straight. Must be a door to nothing." He pounds on it a few times before rejoining us back inside. Grace was glaring. Luna looked into the ground. "Now, not wanting this trip to go to waste," I said. "Hey, Case, I know what you can do. Seeing as you're not scared at all, sit in the woods, alone in the dark for 30 minutes. Now surprisingly he agreed, but on one condition. He got to bring a flashlight with him. We all said yeah. Grace warned that he should stay within our hearing range, just in case. With that, he set off into the darkened woods, every so often yelling, "Hey, can you guys hear me?" Surrounded by silence now, we turn our flashlights and try out a few EVP questions, recording on 2 of our phones. We wanted to see if there was anything there. After only 3 questions, Grace, who had been peering around the edge of the doorframe into the woods, spoke up. Guys," she said. "There's a guy there, and it's not Case." I crept over to her and peeked out, and indeed, there was a guy standing there, a few yards into the forest, moonlight glistening off his mask. He's wearing all black, holding gasoline canisters, as though he's staring at us, slowly stepping behind one of the trees away from sight. What the hell? I ducked away from the door, pulling Grace back to the darkness. "Do you think he saw us? We should go." "Casey," Luca said suddenly, "we have to get him. We can't leave him out here. This is a setup." We then silently agreed that this is something we have to do, and after checking that the coast was clear, we run for it. We were too afraid to call out to Casey or use bright lights, so we snuck around the forest using red tinted lights, each one of us following close to the other. Then we heard it. Casey calling for us back at the cabin. Again, we run for it. The first thing I saw when we got back to the cabin was it appears red, as though it's on fire. The second thing I saw was that the half door that wouldn't budge earlier is wide open, and the light's coming from it, now dimming. Third, I saw Casey. He was standing just beyond the doorway inside whatever laid beyond it. The back of his head facing us, looking down. We call out for him, ask him how he got inside. Said to him, "Have you seen that guy?" But he doesn't move a muscle. Then the light goes out. Grace screamed. I clicked my flashlight on and aimed it at him. He turned around. His eyes looked terrifying. We said, "Hey, you can stop messing with us now." He laughs, not sounding like him, almost like somebody else speaking. Then we hear, "Hey guys, can you hear me?" I span around thinking there's another person with us, thinking Casey's messing with us, but he wasn't. When I turn back, my light hits Casey full on. He was crawling out of the doorway in sporadic jerks. His limbs aren't looking normal, speaking gibberish. We ran. And as we blindly ran into the darkened forest, the light from our flashlight swinging wildly around us, I ran straight into something soft and warm. Another human. It was a guy we seen earlier, still with the gas canisters. Grace screamed again. I leapt up and we bolted. The guy now yells at us again. "Wait," he says. Behind us, there's an inhuman roar, and I glance back. Casey was running faster than I've ever seen anybody run. The guy in the mask yelled again. Now, Casey had been tackled to the ground. They struggled for a moment and fell hard. I tripped too. Luca lifted me up, and together, we kept on running and didn't stop until we met the trailhead where my car is parked. We leap inside. What about Casey? Just go. Behind me, Grace was screaming and crying. I gun it and don't stop until we reach Rifle, where that we're finally able to calm down. Luca was convinced that Casey was messing with us, that the other guy in the mask was his friend. Me? I'm not sure. Grace agrees with me. She thinks something paranormal and very dark and dangerous happened that night. She thinks Casey was possessed. And the guy in the mask was the one who owned the place, definitely, and was doing some kind of cult thing, or hypnosis. But the only thing I know for certain is that something strange happened that night. I don't believe Casey was messing with us. And after a few days, I got several texts from Casey asking what happened, if we burned the cabin, why we left him. I texted Grace and Luca about it, and they say he'd reached out to them too. We all agreed to ignore him. I ended up blocking his number. Still not 100% he wasn't messing with us. This was easily the most scary thing that ever happened to me in my life.
I woke up on a Tuesday night a few months ago. It was 10 PM because I hadn't slept the previous night and had fallen asleep in the middle of the day. I got up, got dressed, and because it was nighttime and I had nothing to do, I sat on my computer. I watched YouTube, browsed Reddit, listened to some music, and talked to some of my friends on Discord for a few hours. Eventually I developed a headache. Not a very bad one, but it was irritating. So I went downstairs into the kitchen, fumbled around while trying to find some ibuprofen. I looked in a couple of drawers and eventually found it. I opened it, took two and swallowed them down, and with some water as well. Then I returned to my room. At the time, I was watching a playlist on YouTube. All the videos on there were somewhat lengthy, about 25-35 minutes each, but I had time to kill. I was on the second video when I went downstairs. Anyway, 10 minutes after I came back to my room, I woke up. I had an extremely painful migraine, but I had just taken medicine, so there was nothing I could do. I had no idea why or how I'd fallen asleep. I wasn't tired and was in the middle of watching a video. I had no reason to have gone to bed and didn't even remember doing so. I checked the clock and saw that only around 10 minutes had passed. I sat back at my computer and was instantly thrown off by something. I was on episode 16. Averaging the length of each video to 30 minutes, that means 8 hours had passed. What? This doesn't make sense, I murmured to myself over the sound of my blood rushing through my head. I activated dark mode for YouTube to try and alleviate some of the pain from looking at the bright screen before checking my history. Every single video had been played. Stranger still, every thumbnail had a full red bar at the bottom, meaning not only had every video been played, they'd been played from beginning to end until the 16th when I woke up. But I distinctly remember checking the clock before getting my pills. It was 12:53 PM on Tuesday, March 3rd. I woke up at 1:08 AM on Wednesday, March 4th. It had been 15 minutes since I got my meds. And I know I did, because the bottle of water I brought up with me was on my desk. 8 hours had just been wiped off the face of the earth. I refreshed YouTube, and all the videos were still there. This wasn't a glitch. I noticed how hot it was in my room. I also noticed a strange smell lingering in the air. It was a grimy, burning kind of smell. It must have been what caused my migraine. Instinctively, I reached over and felt my PC, and it was considerably warmer than usual. And this thing is a gamer monster. It's hard to push this thing to its limits. I opened up Aegis and saw that all 8 of my CPU cores were almost at 100%, and my CPU's temp was at 112. Not good at all. I looked at the task manager and saw that Google was using up 96% of my processor, and yet I had one tab open, the video. Now, anyone who doesn't know about PCs or hardware in general, basically that means that all of my PC's power was being used on this one Chrome tab, and for a PC that can run the newest games on the highest settings without as much as a sweat, this is very unusual. I had no clue what was happening, so I stared out my window for a few minutes while I tried to figure out how 8 hours had just disappeared. The sky was brown and it was windy. Typical British night really. Nothing out of the ordinary was going on outside. I saw cars crawling up the road, lights from planes slowly blinking off in the distance, the soothing glow of lampposts. Most depressingly though, because I live in a city, there were no stars to be seen. I felt a little hungry, so I got up and reluctantly crept back into my kitchen. I was frightened of going through my house at night. I opened the fridge up to see if there was anything particularly appetizing in there. I found nothing that interested me, so I looked in my cupboard and saw some biscuits. Since my mind was a bit flustered, I needed to relax. So I made a cup of tea and grabbed some biscuits, and decided I was going to sit down and watch a movie to clear my mind. I took my tea and biscuits back upstairs, and I opened the door and walked over to my chair. That was the last thing I remember doing before I woke up again. This time I was annoyed. I didn't really understand what was going on, and I needed to find out. I got up once again and checked the clock, 1:32 AM. I went to take a sip of my tea and I noticed it was mouldy. The biscuits were soft too, when before they were hard. Tea usually takes a few days to go mouldy, but once again I hadn't been out for more than 15 minutes. This time I wasn't as bewildered, considering the effects of the first time hadn't completely gone yet, so in a weird way it wasn't as surprising. I was annoyed however that I wouldn't be having any tea and biscuits now, as I had used the last of the sugar. I pushed them aside and leant over my desk to open the blinds, because not only were they down, but they were shut. I never even used my blinds, so again, that was odd. I twisted the slit to open them, and I stumbled backwards in a panic and fell on my bed. I just lay there, staring. Out of that window, I saw something so beautifully, yet utterly terrifying. Something I never thought I'd see. Millions of stars lit up the sky, and I could see all of the clusters and gas clouds scattered throughout the galaxy. I was seeing the Milky Way for the first time in my life, completely free of light pollution. How? I lived in the middle of a dense population centre. I had just seen the sky out of my bedroom window, and it was a dull brown colour. I snapped out my awe-induced trance and grabbed my phone. I opened the camera out of excitement. I wanted to keep this moment. But in the camera, showed the same gloomy brown as before. I brushed it off as a problem with the camera's exposure. I sat there for a full hour before I decided that I'd seen all I could from my window. I started up my computer because for some reason it was off, even though I know it was on when I left it because I just put a movie on and I was going to watch it. I reclined in my chair and even fell asleep watching the film. I woke at 11 AM the same day. I went to the toilet, had a shower and cooked some eggs for breakfast. I watched the TV for a while before growing bored and talking to my friends again on the phone. I had completely forgotten about the events that happened that night. One of my friends, Josh, asked me to go back on Discord and wanted to know if I'd be down to play a game with him. I said yes and ventured back upstairs into my room and sat down on my computer. I woke up at 12:06 AM. Straight away, thoughts flooded my mind as I remembered the previous night. I felt deflated. My phone was dead, so I put it on charge. A few minutes later, I woke up to a myriad of messages from all my friends and family. Things like, "Where did you go? I thought you was going to chill and play some CS. 4th of March. Are you okay? Me and Alfie have both been trying to call you, but you're not answering. Where are you? 5th of March. We're so worried, please respond. You've been gone a week and no one can get a hold of you. We've even called your parents. March 10th. I messaged everyone I knew and told them I was safe, but I'm not. My friend came round to check on me, but he never arrived. He sent me a picture of him on his phone, standing right in front of where I was sitting in my room. I wasn't there in the picture, and he was not standing in front of me in real life. Right now my computer's calendar reads April 12th, and so does my phone. The rest of the world is on July 4th. Every time I leave, the amount of time that passes increases. The first time, it has in a few hours. The second, days. The third, weeks. The last time I went out, a full month had passed when I woke up. The next time I leave my room, a minimum of a year will pass, and I'm afraid that I'm going to die here. If you find yourself suddenly awakening with no memory of falling asleep, and with no injuries, move house and never, ever come back.
I read once that, in antiquity, people were advised to avoid the forests and wilds. These territories were treacherous, and often unexplored or unmarked. Those who would enter would not always return, and so the myths began to spread that terrible things lurked within these lands. Now most people were content with letting the untamed land remain so. As time went on, most people around the world moved on to fearing other things. I, however, have come to fear the woods like our ancestors did. Now my family moved to a small wooded town of Sunderland, Vermont when I was 8. My parents wanted some quiet place that wasn't so crowded. Something in contrast to somewhere like Boston. I didn't particularly want to move, but I hated Boston, so didn't argue. The place my parents bought was so rustic. It was a 2-story with a backyard, resting against the edge of the western forest. For the first 8 years I lived in Sunderland, things were normal. The woods and I had a healthy relationship. I'd hang out within viewing range of the home, never going after dark. That changed when I was a junior in high school. That's when my nightmare began. It was late afternoon, The sky is truly grey. My friend Chris and I went into the woods behind my home to smoke. Now we're really bored at this point. My friend Chris says, "Have you ever explored deeper than this?" I said a couple of times with my mum and dad, but I never really went anywhere. "That means it's time for adventure," he said. "I've got the perfect solution if your fear of getting lost." Chris stopped, dropping his backpack at his feet, rummaging around for a moment to pull out a can of red spray paint. "We can make a ring on the trees we pass so we don't get lost." I say, "Why are you even carrying that?" He said, "You never know when you want to mark your territory." "You're an idiot," I laughed. We continue going deeper into the forest, Chris marking the way. I let him walk ahead of me as we walk further on the ground made soft by years of decay. After a few minutes, he slowed down abruptly before carrying over to something and saying, "Look at this. Check this out." Just in front of Chris was a pit, probably 3 to 4 meters in diameter. It looks as though someone had used a giant post hole digger to lift a perfect cylinder out of the forest floor. Rope-like vines hung around the edges, but the walls of the hole were perfectly smooth. "How far down do you think it goes?" "No idea. Let's throw stuff in." I kick a rock in, waiting to hear it collide with something, but there's only silence. Chris threw a couple of branches as I stood close to the edge, watching them fall back into the black silence again. "Freaky," Chris said. I look down and it's mesmerizing. The longer I stare, the more nervous I felt. I don't like it. My head hurts looking at it. There must be spiders down there. Let's go home. We watch a cigarette fall into the hole. "Man, that goes far," I say as we both make our way to my home. I felt like I'd seen or done something I wasn't meant to though. I revisited the site of my nightmares that evening. In my dream, I was staring up at myself and Chris from within the mosh pit, while Chris tossed something down. I watch it fall in slow motion. I can see it's a rock. It felt as though it was falling for an eternity. When it finally touches the ground, there was then an inhuman cry that carved into my eardrums like a howl. My vision cannonballed out at this point and swerved through the trees in the forest until it stopped outside my bedroom window, where I saw myself asleep. I immediately woke up, looking out of my bedroom window, my eyes searching wildly for something out of place. But there's nothing there. I sat there hyperventilating, trying to calm down. The next day at school, I hurried over to Chris during our shared free period. "Hey man, how's it going?" I said nervously. You good?" "You scared the life out of me," he said while sleepily rubbing his eyes. "Sorry. I was taking a nap and didn't get much sleep." "Did you have that dream?" I thought to myself, I wanted it to be a weird nightmare. I sat down across from him at the table and pulled my laptop out. "So what's good?" I said. "Not much, but listen to this." After I went home, I couldn't stop thinking about the hole. Weird, right? Yeah, I said. So I decided to do some Googling about these pits, and there's this thing called Mel's Hole. Some guy called this paranormal radio show in the 90s and talked about this hole that he found that was so deep, even an 80,000 foot fishing line couldn't reach the bottom. The thing might have been a hoax, but regardless, it got me thinking, is this like the one we found? No idea, but there's something not right about it, I said. It's really bothering me. I don't like it. I said, can we at least call it something else? How about the circle? Yeah, fine. Should we go check it out later? Chris said. Was he not afraid of this thing like I was? I said, I don't know. The circle makes me really anxious. So what are we supposed to do? Forget about it? Chris said, with a hint of frustration. I don't know, but what? You had a dream too, didn't you? Yeah, I said. I saw it too. I then sat there for a moment in silence. You want to go back after that? We had the same dream. That means something. Nothing happened. For all we know, we just got scared by our similar dreams. Chris had a point, but what if something does happen? Chris looks at me for a second, saying, we'll go there. Fine, I mutter. Now after school, I had a lot of homework to do that day, not feeling social, so I decided to stay in for the night while I was working on a short story. I can hear my parents get in from work. I continue typing when I hear footsteps ascending the staircase, stopping near me. I say, what? Silence. I shout for Mum, then Dad. Silence. Chills now slide down my spine as I remembered that dream from the night before. I sat froze to my chair until a heavy knock on the door made me jump in my seat. I stared at the door for what felt like hours, paralyzed with fear. After a few minutes, I heard the front door open again, this time accompanied by my parents' voices. I breathed a sigh of relief. I'm just imagining things, I told myself. I opened my bedroom door, so felt safer, knowing my parents were home. I get back to my story. Later that night as I drift off, the same dream I had the night before played back to me, once again. I woke up after seeing myself in bed, this time shivering and covered in sweat. I jumped out of my bed and pulled my blinds shut. I look over to the alarm clock and it says 3:02 AM. Now suddenly, I hear slow, methodical footsteps ascending the staircase again. Moving quietly, I shove the mini fridge in my room. In front of the door, going back to bed, cowering under my sheets. I said, go away, under my breath. And now there's something running at the door, and bang, the door shakes again. I'm very worried now, but drifted into an uneasy sleep. The following morning, I'm awoken by a heavy banging on my door. I jolted upright. Heather, open this now, my mum shouts. I sighed in relief as I got out of my bed, moving the fridge away from the door. My mum instantly opens it. Why was your door blocked? I debated telling her the truth, but she wouldn't believe me. I was moving my furniture around last night and forgot to move the fridge back. Sorry. My mum looked at me with exasperation. Okay, but don't leave it. Don't leave it in front of your door. What if there's a fire? Sorry, Mum, I said. Come downstairs for breakfast. Dad made waffles. When I got to school, I immediately saw Chris. I said, I think something followed us from the circle. What are you talking about? He replies. So nothing happened to you yesterday night? No, why? Something tried to get to my room. How'd you know? He said. Just trust me, Jesus. Alright, calm down. Tell me what happened. I then told Chris everything that I'd experienced that night. Christ, do you think it will ever happen again tonight? I don't know. Probably. We have to do something. We don't even know what that thing is or what it wants. What can we do? He said. Maybe there's some kind of offering we can make. I think the rock falling down is a sign. I don't think so. You got a better idea? He said. No, I guess not. We should try throwing some meat down. What else do demons want? Flowers? Mixtapes? I replied sarcastically. Fine, I'll get meat and jewelry. So that afternoon, I watched as Chris walked up my driveway. You ready? I said. Yeah, are you? You don't look so good, Chris replied. I don't really want to go back there, but I'd rather fix whatever's happening. The two of us followed the marked trees to the circle. Chris exclaimed. Holding his nose, it smells bad. Did it smell last time? I couldn't remember. Definitely not, he said. I peered over the edge and felt an urge to jump, stepping back. Alright, let's throw in the offerings. Chris threw some leftover meat he had in his fridge in the hole, and I threw the jewelry I didn't wear anymore. Nothing happened. Is that it? Chris said. We won't know until tomorrow. I felt a sense of relief as though a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We went back to my place and played video games until Chris had to go home. I felt uneasy but hopeful as night came. I hadn't heard anything out of place so far when I went back to bed. I laid there listening to dark silence, fearing that it would not last. To my surprise, it did. I finally fell asleep and didn't want to wake up until morning. The offering worked. When I got to school, I approached Chris. Hey man, I think we did it. I don't know about that, he said. My gut sank. What do you mean? Well, once I got home last night, my whole house smelled like rotten eggs. I spent like an hour finding the source, but couldn't smell it anymore. So I just went to my room and went to my laptop. As I was falling asleep, I heard a glass shatter downstairs. I figured it's probably just my cat knocking over a glass or something. When I got down there, the glass from the front door was broken all over the living room floor. I couldn't see anyone outside, but I got this awful feeling I shouldn't be there. Where were your parents? Late night, they didn't get back until after all this. Well, what happened next? I didn't go outside. I called my parents and told them someone threw a rock through the front door. They said they'd deal with it when they're home. I just went to my room and looked at eye bleach and Shive videos to calm myself, but I just couldn't shake the dread. Then there were heavy footsteps running down the hallway out of my bedroom. My heart was racing. They'd reach the end of the hall, then go to the opposite direction. Finally, something slammed heavily into my door. I was freaking out so much by now, especially when I realized my phone was downstairs. Why didn't you call the cops when you heard the door shatter? I don't know, I was freaking out. Chris sighed. Anyway, I heard the footsteps above me in the attic too. Then something tapping on my window. I was too afraid to open the curtains. Eventually I heard my parents' car moving up the driveway, and suddenly the sound stopped. It took me a few minutes to calm myself down, but I told my parents that I thought somebody broken in and maybe hiding. They then came by and did a search. They didn't find anything though. They said they'd station a car outside for a bit. Well, what should we do? Chris fell silent for a minute. What if it wasn't something living? No, we can't do that. Are you serious? Chris is getting agitated. I understood his fear, but I didn't want to do something violent to appease this thing. Listen man, I want this to stop as much as you do, but not like this. It doesn't have to be a dog or goat or something. We could just trap a squirrel. If you trap them, then fine, I said. That night I dreamt again, but the nightmare changed. I was dangling in the pit clutching a vine, filled with dread as I peered into darkness below. I tried climbing out, but the vine broke. As I fell deep into the abyss, windows started appearing in the dirt, and a stone surrounded me. I could see my family, Chris, and windows that shadowed families and children in vintage clothing. The further I fell, the more disturbing the images through the window became. My eyes flooding with tears. I started to see people I knew from school suddenly weeping blood. I saw my parents lying motionless in the back. I saw Chris crying in his bed, blood everywhere. My descent slowed until I eventually landed in my bed. It formed out of utter darkness. There was a steady tapping at my window, and I slowly got out of bed despite my overwhelming terror and pain. I felt like I was walking through the water as I moved through my room. I approached the window. I could see the outline of Chris in my yard. My window unlocks itself and gently opens, and a breeze comes through. "Chris," I shout. He began to laugh. The sound of a crowd of people, not one guy. He sank into the ground as the world around me began to shake. I woke up to find my bed shaking violently. I start screaming, and it suddenly stops. My heart was racing, and I barely had time to catch my breath before I heard a light tapping on the window. I tried to ignore it, but the longer I did so, the heavier it became until I heard the glass crack. Then silence. I was not about to look out my window. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Chris's number. He picked up immediately. "You okay? What's up, Chris?" "More stuff happened. We need to finish this tomorrow." "Did the traps catch anything?" I said between heavy breaths. "I haven't checked yet." "What happened?" I woke up from a nightmare to my bed shaking, something hitting on my window. "Were you awake when I called?" "Yeah, something happened here." I went downstairs to get a glass of water, and all of the windows and doors in the entire house are open. I tried to wake my parents, but they're really really cold. What about the cops? Wasn't there one stationed? They're asleep too. The cops are useless. Is everything okay? I've been hearing footsteps throughout the house. I've just been hiding in my room. I'll go to bed when the sun's up again. Just stay on the phone with me. Okay. I stay on the phone with Chris until the sunlight pours through my windows. I can hear what sounds like distant whispering outside my window throughout the night, but they disappeared with darkness. The rest of the day went normal, and the two of us met up after school in my backyard. My parents were still at work as I waited outside my house. After a couple of minutes, Chris came around the corner holding two humane traps, one with a rabbit in it and the other a restless raccoon. My heart sank thinking of what was going to happen. "You ready to end this?" Chris said to me. "Yeah, I feel bad for them though." Chris looks at the animals briefly and frowns. "I'm not excited either, but we gotta do this. Come on, let's go." The two of us walk through the forest, following the marked trees to the circle. The land around us is silent. In the cages, the animals are going berserk, biting at the cage, making horrible sounds. I felt emotional anguish and physical dread. As we approached the circle, Chris turned to me saying, "Does it look bigger to you?" It definitely was. "Alright, do you want to throw them in?" Chris said to me, lifting up the cages. "I really don't. I'll cry if I do." "Okay, I'll do it." Chris walks over to the edge, peering inside, taking a deep breath. "Okay." I've watched as Chris threw the panicking animals into the abyss. The sounds of their whimpers and cries going silent as the circle swallows them. Tears welled up in my eyes and my face. "Is that it? Can we go?" "Yeah, let's go. I need to relax." As night fell, we parted ways. Now the events of the last few days have just got weirder and weirder. Since Friday night, I stayed off a little late, really anxious, not able to sleep. By 1 AM, my parents had gone to bed, and nothing had happened yet. I was beginning to feel like things had worked out, but I checked my phone. There were notifications from Chris. I decided to call him to check up. All I got was a voicemail. "He's just asleep," I thought. I continued to play video games until I heard shouting outside my window. I recognized Chris's voice. I immediately ran to my window and opened it. There he was, standing in moonlight in my backyard. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. We have to go to the circle. Things are worse." "What are you talking about? What happened?" "Oh," Chris sighed. "Ah." I sighed back and put on some jeans, grabbing a flashlight. I also grabbed a knife just in case. I went downstairs, careful to not wake my parents, and went to the back door. Chris is gone. I was scared, but I wasn't about to let my best friend go to the circle alone. It occurred to me that this might be a trick, an inhuman force appearing as Chris. This was a common twist in horror films, I thought. Even so, I wasn't going to risk leaving Chris alone in the woods without a flashlight. I opened the door, take a deep breath and enter the woods. There was a stringent mist hanging over the forest as I followed the trees. Calling out Chris's name, gripping the knife in my left hand as I carefully made my way through the woods. Eventually I came to the circle. It's wilder now. It seemed to be growing before my eyes. There's a loud groan as a tree at the edge has lost its grip, tumbling into the abyss. Heather, I heard Chris behind me. Chris, I said. He was standing with a slouch just a couple of feet away. What happened? Why are we here? I don't know. But it's worse now, Heather. Chris, calm down. Talk to me. No, Chris shouted. He pushed me down and I fell. I looked behind me and I'm so close to the hole. Chris, what the hell? I shouted as I stood up. He grunted and laughed at me. I dodged him and stumbled around, nearly falling into the abyss. I have to, Heather, it's the only way. He lunges at me again, successfully knocking me against a tree. My head colliding with the bark. I dropped everything in my hands as I hit the tree. He shoved me harder against the bark as I tried to punch and push him away. I'm sorry, Chris, I shouted as I brought my left leg up between his knees. He instantly keeled over as I grabbed my knife from beside the tree. Calm down, I said. I don't want to use this. Chris moans in pain and looks up at me before trying to lunge at me again. I sidestepped him, slashing him clumsily with the knife, tearing his shirt. Everything's happening so fast. Chris cried out and came at me again. I swung the knife frantically as he approaches me, landing one swipe on his torso. He put his hand to his chest, filming the warm blood seeping through his fingers. He looked at me with a look of anger that I've never seen before. I was afraid. I tried to step back, but he lunges at me again. I raised a knife and stabbed at him. Try not to kill him. He grunts loudly as a knife pierces his shoulder, stumbling back to the edge of the circle. No, Chris. I sprang forward and tried to grab him as he falls backwards, but I was too late. I watch in terror as he disappears into the abyss, screaming as he fell. The ground quaked as the hole stops growing. I collapsed on the ground crying. Chris, no, I cried. I've killed my best friend. Even though in self-defense it's not the point. I wanted to wake up, but it's not a dream. I'm living a nightmare. Too distraught to comprehend what's just happened. I grabbed my flashlight, stumbling back through the mist. I woke my parents up as soon as I got home, telling them everything. They were skeptical, but my dad agreed to follow me out to the woods after seeing how scared I was. The mist was gone. I led him along the marked trees, reaching the end. Heather, there's nothing here. It was a dream. My dad sighed. I stared in absolute disbelief at the solid ground before me. This was where the circle was. I could see the rock that Chris had tripped on, and the disturbed soil where the tree had fallen into nothingness. I propped myself against a tree, overcome with nausea. Honey, you okay? My dad said, putting a hand on my shoulder. It must have been a dream, I said. I didn't believe it. Everything I just experienced was so surreal. The knife, the circle, the blood, Chris's screams, all serenading into my brain. But I didn't want to try and rationalize it. We return home and I go to bed, although I never went to sleep. I kept trying to call Chris throughout the night and the following days, but he never answered. Neither would his parents when I called his home. I knocked on their door, but no one seemed to be home. The following Monday, Chris didn't show up to school at all. The same with Tuesday and Wednesday. The police searched his home and found the bodies of both parents. The cops theorized that Chris had murdered his parents, ran away to avoid arrest, but I knew the truth. Chris was dead. I was the only one who knew what had really happened to him, but what could I say? People would just think that I was crazy, or that I was trying to cover my friend. The circle was gone, so was my best friend.
It started out relatively benign. I was awakened one day to the sound of quick footsteps outside my door. I would have normally thought nothing of it and gone back to sleep, but on this particular night, I was gripped with fear. It sounded like someone was running on the landing on the other side of my door. When I opened my bedroom door, my heart started to race. My 10-year-old brother was running laps around the landing, arms stiff by his side, eyes wide open, curly hair bouncing all over his face. I stood in silence for a full minute, unsure of how to react. My immediate thought is that he was sleepwalking, but this looked different. His eyes were wide open, and I could quite easily see a palpable fear behind them. I remembered hearing that you shouldn't suddenly awake a sleepwalker, or they could be in shock, but this felt different. "Jared," I whispered. No response. He continued to briskly walk, arms and legs stiff as logs. "Jared!" And just like that, he seemed to snap out of it. But rather than acknowledging me at all, he did a short beeline and continued back in his bedroom at the same brisk pace. I warily watched him crawl into bed and roll over. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw Jared quietly chomping down a bowl of Cheerios. "What was with you last night?" I asked him. Jared looked up from his breakfast. His face looked high-strung and tired. He looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. "What are you talking about?" Jared asked. I thought I'd seen the last of it, but my brother's nightly excursions continued. Every few nights, when my house was asleep, I would be ripped from the depths of my sleep by the sound of hurried footsteps, and every time I opened the door to face them, I would see Jared doing laps around the stair landing, eyes agape with discernible terror. And every single time, I was able to usher him back to bed by simply calling out his name. I thought I'd seen the worst of it until a few weeks ago. Midterm exams meant a lot of caffeine, and a lot of caffeine meant I would certainly be getting up to pee in the middle of the night. I opened the bathroom door, rubbing my eyes. I turned on the light and began to rip down my PJs when I saw something in the bathtub that caught my eye. Eyes bloodshot and wide open, Jared stood in the corner of the bathtub staring right into the mirror across from him. I felt my insides clench with fear and my heart nearly ripped out my throat. Jared's arm was so stiff that his knuckles were white against his side. He looked oddly still. There was no discernible breath leaving his lungs. "Jared, what are you doing?" "There's something in the mirror," Jared said, and goosebumps erupted across my body. His eyes did not leave the mirror once. His eyes were now filled to the brim with tears. I felt my own eyes water as I looked into the spot of the mirror where Jared was staring. What I saw was Jared staring back at me, smiling with a look of a man who was sick with joy. His huge smile and wide eyes looked oddly alien in the dim light of the washroom. I felt a prickly, hot feeling spread across my back and neck, and momentarily got lightheaded. I whirled back around and heard a thump beside me as Jared fainted in the tub and slammed his head. It's been a few weeks since that night. The doctors told us that Jared was fine medically. He spent days in the sleep lab, running every test you could think of, and nothing. They didn't discover a single anomaly in all of those tests. Except Jared doesn't talk anymore. He hasn't said a word in weeks or made eye contact. The team of psychiatrists that have been seeing him think that he got so spooked that night that it might have sent him into shock. To me, he looks devoid of all emotion at all. Not sad or afraid of anything. He just looks empty. I've stopped drinking coffee before bed, and if I really need to go, I leave a plastic water bottle or two on the nightstand beside me.